Good morning. The mass marketing section of the Toronto Police Financial Crimes Unit is a member of the Toronto Strategic Partnership Against Cross-Border Fraud. This partnership represents a combined enforcement strategy dealing with the investigation of mass marketing fraud offenses that originate in Ontario but often have international connections. During August of 2014, members of the mass marketing section commenced a fraud-related investigation which revealed a romance scam involving a 63-year-old Toronto widow. She was defrauded of approximately $609,000. Investigators worked with members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Postal Inspection Service. This joint investigation uncovered the identities of individuals allegedly responsible for the cross-border laundering of proceeds of crime with a criminal organization. It is alleged that the proceeds were obtained via a variety of fraudulent schemes directed against the public. Victims were encouraged to wire frauds to various bank accounts across borders. On October the 7th, 2015, members of the Financial Crimes Unit, assisted by the Peel Regional Police Service, executed a search warrant at the residence of Ikachaku Amadi, 34 years, of Mississauga. On the same day, arrests of Linio Malefi, 31 years, of Toronto, and Ikachaku Amadi, 34 years, of Toronto, were conducted. They've been charged in relation to the romance scam with laundering the proceeds of crime and fraud over $5,000. It's further alleged that Akahoman Igadosi, 41 years, of Toronto, is a member of an organization known as the Black Axe Movement, the Black Axe or the Neo-Black Movement of Africa. The Neo-Black Movement of Africa is a transnational organization with affiliates in major cities around the globe known as zones. Akahoman Igadosi was actively laundering proceeds of crime with and or for other members of the Black Axe organization for monetary benefit. He has been charged with laundering the proceeds of crime, fraud over $5,000, and participation in a criminal organization. Based upon their own investigation with assistance from the Toronto Police Service, the FBI has recently indicted 6 individuals for alleged vast wire fraud, included money laundering and conspiracy to commit fraud. The conspirators attempted to defraud victims in the United States of over $5 billion. Among the 2 people who have been indicted in the United States include accused here in Canada, Akahoman Igadosi and Ikachaku Amadi. The process to commence with their extradition will begin upon the resolution of their charges here in Ontario. It's come to our attention that persons who have identified themselves with the Black Axe organization in Toronto are attempting to exert influence in the community here, particularly in the expatriate Nigerian community. There are incidents that are causing us concern. We are appealing to the public to come forward if they have knowledge of these incidents and report them to us via any means they can, be it confidentially, be it directly, be it by Twitter, Crime Stoppers, or any other means. We're concerned with this group. I would also like to point out that in this offense, the accused, Akahoman Igadosi, utilized forged identification and an alias belonging to that of a person who allegedly worked for the United Nations in the commission of his offenses. The pictures behind me on the left include his Toronto police mugshot, followed by a photograph that was used on a forged UN identity document that was used in the commission of the fraud. We're appealing to the public, anyone who's had contact with this person, either a person resembling him or using such identification, or the name Martins Acker Jr. or Martin Acker, to contact Toronto Police. Specifically, we're asking that you contact Detective Constable Mike Kelly at 416-808-7824 if you have information regarding this. And that's all I have for you, folks.
Explain to us how this was working. What would they do? How would they approach people? Explain how their schemes.
There's various fraud schemes. Among them are romance fraud, Most of them have an online component. It could be lotto scams are another popular one. What we call overpayment schemes. It's a variety of schemes, and what the allegations are is that the accused, among their responsibilities, were the providing of accounts by which those funds could be laundered to. Often victims are encouraged to send money to various bank accounts, whether they be created via aliases or they're being temporarily taken over. That's a whole other investigation. But the long and the short of it is victims are convinced to buy into a scheme and wire money abroad with the expectation of some benefit down the road, which of course never occurs. I'm sorry, there's two questions coming at once here.
Can you tell us what happened with the involving the 63-year-old woman?
I beg your pardon?
The woman, the 63-year-old woman, can you tell us how what that was about?
I'm going to refer those sorts of questions to Detective Constable Mike Kelly and Tim Trotter for specific investigations, specific questions about the investigation. Keep in mind, they can't give out too much information, but they're probably the better person to speak to regarding that, and that will happen after this.
What is a romance
A
scheme?
romance scheme, there's variations, but simply stated, people are contacted. These days, it's mostly social media. Most of the victims, in my experience, are people who are in a vulnerable position. They're often lonely, sometimes they're elderly, but not always. Contact is made, and at some point, some sort of emergency is stated that requires financial intervention from the victim. The victim complies, usually wiring money, and this is dragged on, sometimes over months and years. And the whole thing is a fraud from the get-go.
How long were these people operating for then?
I beg your pardon?
How long were these people operating?
Well, we have information that suggests that Igadoisi, for example, was active back in 2011 using that particular UN identification as part of the ruse. We're only alleging this particular charge or these particular charges against him, but we are concerned that there may be more victims, not only within Canada but elsewhere. There is an international component to this investigation above and beyond the laundering of funds overseas. I believe part of this offense actually occurred in Ireland. And again, you can speak to Mike Kelly and Tim Trotter for further clarification on that.
Can you tell us more about this Black Axe organization and how people might identify their movements?
Well, I'm not going to comment too much about the Black Axe, and you can again refer to Tim Trotter and Mike Kelly for clarification on that. I can say that their reputation overseas is well established, and we believe they're active here in Toronto in the GTA. I'll refer further questions to Mike Kelly and Tim Trotter.
But do you believe there's likely more people over here who are working on behalf of that organization?
I believe so, yes.
Was Mr. Igadoisi in the Black Axe?
I'm not going to get that specific.
Can you tell us how the U.S. got involved in this? I mean, were they perpetrating crimes, I guess, over the internet with people in the U.S. as well? Can you just explain that again to us?
Because these victims these offenses are committed largely initiated over the internet and followed up on over the internet, the borders are essentially meaningless. They certainly mean something to law enforcement, but when you're perpetrating a fraud scheme, a border is something you cross, but it's not a barrier. So many of the victims of these schemes are likely to be in the United States, in Canada, and elsewhere. They're not restricted by borders in any way.
How many victims have you identified at this point?
In our particular investigation, we're dealing with one victim, but an allegation is made that the fraudulent proceeds have been laundered for the purpose of assisting members of the Black Axe in conjunction with their activities. I'm not really in a position to comment on the FBI investigation.
How does that work, laundering this money? Like, for the regular person out there, we don't know what that means.
Anytime you obtain money, which is proceeds of crime, and you cause that to be moved essentially to another location, typically we're talking electronically here, you're essentially laundering money. If you convert it to another form, if you pass it along to another location and then distribute it to other players, you're laundering money.
Can you just talk, you said the one woman was taken for more than $600,000.
$609,000.
Is that an exceedingly high amount compared to what you see normally?
It is a high amount. I am aware of other cases not pertaining to this investigation specifically where those numbers exceed $1 million, and those are occurrences that are occurring here in Toronto in recent times.
That number is typically high for the same.
It's higher than normal, but it's not unusual. They're often in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And the 5 billion is the FBI of the
So
total.
this is part of the FBI indictment, and I can't comment anything beyond the fact that it alleged that that is the amount of money that was attempted to be moved or laundered by persons orchestrating these schemes.
The loss of the $609,000, what has that done to this person's life? What's the
It's
impact?
devastated her.
Can you just, was the $609,000, how much time period was that over? Was that a short time period, was that a long time? 'Cause that's a
I'll
lot of
refer
money.
to Tim Kelly, excuse me, Tim Trotter and Mike Kelly for those specific questions, but what I can say about it is it wasn't simply electronic transfers, there were actual cash transfers and there was international travel involved.
Any advice for people who may think they're in a similar situation, or just to caution folks?
It's very hard to think objectively when you're under some form of stress. Most of the people who are victims of this have some vulnerability, whether they're lonely, whether they're elderly, you name it. I would certainly say for family members of if you know someone who's vulnerable, be it your mother, your aunt, your sister, or your brother or father, you've got to stay in touch with your family. And when you see people becoming secretive, or they're becoming detached for their family members, strange financial transactions involving whether it's wires or services, money wiring services that are publicly available when they don't normally do that sort of thing. These are things you need to be aware of, but the simplest advice is stay on top of your friends and relatives who you believe may be vulnerable, because this sort of thing is happening more often than we are usually conversant with.
You said this is a relationship scam. I imagine it starts out very kind of, affectionate, and you're trying to lure the person in. Does the tone of those relationships tend to change as you begin to ask for more and more money? Does it become kind of more of a bullying type of thing, or demanding?
They go all over the place, but the long story short is there's initially a request for money to be given to deal with some sort of emergency, and then they just get strung along, and I can come up with 100 scenarios that they come up with, and I'd still be short.
Does this mostly stay in the Nigerian community, this particular scam, or have they sort of branched out?
We're not alleging that it's being perpetrated only by the Nigerian family. It's in this particular case, that background exists, and certainly the Black Axe movement has its origins there. But the fact is, they're here doing the offenses here.
Can you just tell us, so you've got one victim that you've identified here in Toronto, 609,000, but the 5 billion, where is that figure coming from?
It's coming from the investigation with the FBI. Now, their investigation at some juncture crossed paths with our own. I can't get any further into than that, but we realized we were working some of the same targets.
So these are 3 suspects. Are there more involved in this $5 billion?
There are indictments to follow on the U.S. side, yes.
Okay, and so these 3 are Canadian citizens?
I'm not in a position to answer that.
Are they from Toronto?
Well, 2 of them are from Toronto. Linnea Molefe is from Toronto, and the accused, Amadi, is from Toronto, and Ika Chapo is from, Mississauga? Amadi is from Mississauga, excuse me. The other 2 are from Toronto.
So
So
what
you've
happens?
named 3 accused. I mean, were they all working together? Were they all involved with this woman, this
Yes,
69?
the charges are laid jointly. However, only one of them is facing the criminal organization charge.
So what happens now exactly? Next steps in terms of court to, they're indicted, what's
All
the next
3
steps?
are before the courts. The accused, Ika Chaku, is actually in bail court today at Old City Hall. The accused, Amadi, I believe, has been released on a form of bail. The accused, Molefe, was released on a recognizance at the time of arrest.
Would they have to finish their court process here first before extradition?
That's correct, yes.
So it could be a couple of years before they get extradited.
I can't speculate. It could be.
What kind of penalties do they face here? What kind of jail time do they face here?
It's all over the board, and the devil's in the details of these cases. Our victims are often reluctant, and anything's possible. If the case is prosecuted effectively, they could be facing prison sentences.
How did you even find out about these guys? What led you to find them?
I'm not going to get into the details of the investigation.
Because they impersonated somebody from the UN, was there any violation of any like international international laws in this case?
There may well be. I mean, in the most basic sense here in Canada, anytime you present any form of government identification, be it here from Canada or elsewhere, you're at the very least, you're in possession of a counterfeit government mark. I don't even know whether this UN identification even exists. So I don't really answer your question.
Have you
How is he
recouped any
trying to
money at
use-
this point?
I beg your pardon?
Have you recouped any of the money at this point?
No.
How is he trying to use this ID?
It was used in the furtherance of the fraud. So often the person will, well, usually they're pretending to be someone other than whom they are in order to enhance their own credibility, and that's the case here.
The money, the question was asked about the money. Is that money, I mean, let's be honest, it's gone. It's not likely coming back. Is that?
More than likely, yes.
How long was the woman involved with this over the internet? Was it a
I'll
period of
defer that to Tim Trotter and Mike Kelly.
Black Axe, can you just tell us, what would the money be used to do for the Black Axe?
I frankly don't know. The money is passed to the members, and what they do with it is really up to them, I guess.
And what exactly is the Black Axe?
I'm going to leave that to Mike Kelly and Tim Trotter to get into the details of the Black Axe. For our purposes, we're alleging in this instance they're behaving as a criminal organization, in this particular instance.
Did the suspects live some high lifestyle? Did they use their money personally to?
It's my experience is typically they do live a high lifestyle. I'm not prepared to comment on that.
So is it correct to say that your investigation centers around a 62-year-old woman who was involved in a romance scam with 3 of these people, or just the 2 guys, or?
There's really it was the offense was conspiratorial in nature. She was involved in what she felt was a relationship with one person. Our investigation led to, we saw a significant linkage with what was going on the U.S. side, which is what brought the U.S. Postal Inspection Service and the FBI and us together in this instance. Notes were compared, and lo and behold, we were on to something more than what we had originally.
She had never met this man. Is that the case? Like it was
Not prior to the commencing of the offense, no. There was no prior relationship.
But it was completely an internet thing. It was never face-to-face.
There was a face-to-face at some point. I'll defer that.
Can we hear from Kelly and Trotter now, just to hear about some details of the Black Axe and the case case? Would that be okay?
Yeah, I'm Mike Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, of Toronto Police Financial Crimes. And I guess I can answer questions specifically, some questions as it relates to the defrauding of our victim here in the city of Toronto.
So can you just maybe give us a brief synopsis of how you found out about the scam and just maybe the details about this woman and what happened?
It's part of the allegation that the victim reported starting out on a dating website, and that she was contacted and some form of communication was exchanged back and forth. At some point or another, she was told that there was some form of urgency or assistance that was required. Part of that assistance required her handing over some money, and she did so on a number of occasions, a couple of meetings in person, some meetings in person, and as well as some international wire transfers.
And so was it 600,000 all at once? Was it?
It was in a series of transactions over a period of months. I believe the allegations are that between, I believe it was mid-March of 2014 until late at the end of June 2014 were the series of transactions.
So she gave away 603, or did they actually raid her accounts?
She wasn't robbed. She was encouraged to pass those money along, and she did so under a false pretense as part of the allegation.
How did you find out that this was happening? Did she contact you? Or?
She had reported the matter to the Toronto Police, and evidence that we uncovered led us to it.
Can you just go over a timeline? I mean, how long did this last, and did the amounts get steadily bigger, and did it turn from voluntarily handing it over to extortion at some point?
There was there's no evidence of actual extortion. As Detective Sergeant Nichol advised earlier, these situations, not just this one, but other situations that are very similar to this that are occurring in the city on a regular basis, they do involve, in the beginning, some form of person who, in this case, like in a romance scam, you have a person who has a vulnerability and a desire to have somebody in their lives and have a relationship with someone. and then that person's emotional state, once they start to buy in and care for somebody, are then asked for some form of assistance, and it's only out of their own sense of devotion and caring and wanting to be helpful that, in general, that's what causes them to go. And as time goes on, the need for more financial assistance generally does ramp up, and that's generally that's what we're alleging here.
Did she know he was here? Did she know he was in the same city?
I can't get too much into the specifics of the evidence. I can say that there were face-to-face meetings, but I don't want to get too much into the specifics.
What kind of emergency was this person describing that she?
Again, I don't want to get too much into very specifics. I would say that in general, there's usually some form of difficulty in being together. That there's, in general, there's some form of crisis involving, well, I want to come be with you, however, there's this issue, and this issue can only be resolved monetarily, and if you can do this, we can be together.
And what dating service are we talking about?
We won't be getting into that.
But it can happen on any dating service?
Yes, and it can happen not just on dating services, but it can happen on social media. It can happen pretty much any way that human beings can interact. That can be the genesis of it. And often, too, these schemes aren't necessarily committed to one specific plot line. So you can have something that starts off as a romance scam, where somebody's induced by some form of romance, and then it'll pivot to something else where there's some large sum of money sitting in a case somewhere that's tarnished with something known as a black money scam, and then it can be pivoted, oh, well, the money that's coming to you is now held up in some other crisis, and it's just a means of extracting. Well, I think we sort of have to get away from the idea of that scams themselves have some form of permanent meaning, or that it can only be one thing. These scams and the underlying premise behind them are just a means of introduction of getting all to the same point. All of them drive at the same ultimate ending, which is the victim then passing along money. And that whether it's a romance scheme, a lottery scheme, some other scheme, all of it is just designed to get you to that point, whatever they think is I guess, for lack of a better term, the pickup line, to sort of breach the subcontext and then drive to that ultimate goal.
Given what happened in the scam, would you say it's likely there's more victims? You wouldn't be surprised to find out that more people have been affected?
I would not be surprised if there are more victims, no.
You said this victim came forward herself. Did she have family? Did the family finally get involved?
It is my understanding that it was with the assistance of her family that she came to police, yes.
So she gave away the $609,000 between March 2014 and June 2014. That's a short span time frame.
Yes, it was very rapid.
And how did you become in contact with the Americans in the FBI?
Like I said, I don't want to get too much into specifics. What I can say is that as a result of our investigation, we saw some, again, like Detective Sergeant Nichol referred to earlier, that these schemes, borders are effectively meaningless, that we find information and data that involve multiple sides and multiple borders, and when we see those things, we reached out to the appropriate people with jurisdiction who would be able to help us.
Do you believe you've got everybody that you think is involved in this scam, or is there still suspects that are outstanding?
In this particular scheme, I believe that there were additional people that assisted.
The victims in the United States, this wasn't romance schemes though, was it?
I don't want to get too much into the FBI's investigation. I can only really speak to ours.
You said that international travel was also involved. How so?
Again, I don't want to get too much of that specific evidence that will be tendered at court. This is not really the venue for that.
Give us a sense of how she got this money. Did she sell her house or raid her retirement savings? Or?
What I can say, that's rather specific. What I can say is that the net effect of this was economically devastating to her. I don't want to get too much into specifics, but I will say that just as a personal anecdote, we went to visit her shortly in the wintertime and found her in a situation where her house, at her home, and the heat was barely on. She was wearing a jacket and mittens inside, and her jacket and a hat on in her house. She's been economically ruined, and obviously, given her age, it's impossible for people to make a lifetime's worth of money back up, starting again at this point in their lives.
So what do you say to people? As if you haven't said it already, what do you tell people to be aware of?
Well, it's it's sort of a general, just a general template, because I think sometimes we get too, again, I keep saying it, we get too enamored in the particular scam types and start naming off the typologies too much. We sound a little repetitive. Because the different scams, it really doesn't matter. When it comes down to it, it comes down to whatever the premise is, people are going to ask you to send your money and just not so readily part with money. And on top of it, too, vulnerabilities are usually the linchpin for it. So whether like work from home scams or lottery scams, people may be economically compromised in a situation where perhaps their lights are going to be turned off. So they turn to advanced fee loan schemes that wind up taking advantage of them. Like Detective Sergeant Nichols talked about, it would be helpful for people to stay on top of their their loved ones, particularly if they're older or vulnerable, or you sense some form of secrecy. That always is a hallmark of things. Anytime you have somebody that you're communicating with asking you to send money but telling you to keep it real quiet, that's also usually a pretty good hint that there's probably something wrong.
Can we talk about the black axe now?
I'll defer to Detective Constable Tim Trotter for that.
Thank you.
Good morning. Detective Constable Tim Trotter. Spelling his surname is Trotter.
Sort of the same thing. Can you just go over what this organization is and maybe a bit of history about them and how they're involved here?
The Neo-Black Movement of Africa is the contemporary embodiment of a Nigerian confraternity, which started in 1977 in the university system in Nigeria. Originally it was called the Black Axe. In our estimation, the two organizations are synonymous, and within the Nigerian community, they're believed to be synonymous. At this point, the Neo-Black movement struggles quite hardly to maintain a thin veneer of respectability. They do that through articulating their alleged altruism, but when you look at the organization, they maintain the same regalia, the same vernacular as the Black Axe. They also retain the same mission statement. They have a charter that they follow and a structure, and that too mirrors the traditional charter of the Black Axe.
What exactly? What was the Black Axe founded?
A confraternity in the Nigerian system is what we would understand in Western democracy as similar to a fraternity. Upon its inception in 1977, it started with high-minded ideals, social justice, a lot of buzzwords, Pan-Africanism, something they refer to vaguely as Blackism and the advancement of that. What they found amongst a series of confraternities in the Nigerian system, what they descended into is essentially street gangs in the context of the Nigerian university system. There are competing confraternities in Nigeria. The Black Axe / Neo-Black Movement of Africa is considered one of the premier confraternities and is regarded by Nigerians both in Nigeria and within the Nigerian diaspora worldwide as a significant violent presence within the Nigerian culture.
So do we think that this woman's money in Toronto ultimately went to this group? Is that the connection? Or it was laundered through this group? Or what's the connection?
Well, certainly the allegation that someone involved with the group was involved in laundering of funds, but we're not ready to engage in the speculation of where the funds went to or why they were obtained in the first place.
Say overall, does the group have a reputation for fraud? Or is it just that this guy who belongs to the group just happens to be a fraudster?
In the popular lexicon back in Nigeria and to a lesser degree worldwide, this is a very secretive organization, so there's not a lot of open source information about it. But when you do go back into the foundation documents, other terms that people use, pejorative terms about the people of the Black Axe or so-called axemen, are 419 boys, referring to Nigerian 419 scams, Yahoo boys for their use of computers to facilitate crimes like romance scams and other advanced free fraud scams.
So how prevalent or how present is the Black Axe in the Toronto area? You said that they've got a presence here, correct?
Our estimation is they have a substantive presence here. We can't divulge at this point the exact numbers. We believe they have an established presence in Toronto and Vancouver and throughout North America.
And are people frightened of them?
Pardon?
Are people frightened of them? I mean, would that be something that people in the Nigerian community would be afraid of?
We have a wealth of anecdotal evidence and documentary evidence that suggests that people are aware of their presence and are frightened of them.
Is there proper structure to this organization? Like, are there people here in Toronto who are part of the organization who are considered to be like bosses over here and the people who work under them? Is there a proper structure?
Yes, they have an established hierarchy and a title and an internal structure that we're aware of.
How concerned are you that they've established themselves here?
In what sense?
And the fact that this is a violent group, you're saying, that is committing fraudulent acts, how concerned are you that they are doing crime?
Well, the Toronto Police are committed to aiding society's most vulnerable people. And what we have here is an organization that, in our estimation and what our analysis supports, is that not only are they engaged in, some of their members engaged in fraud against the elderly and the marginalized members of society, but also that within the Nigerian community, they exert an undue influence. And we believe up until this time, the members of the Nigerian diaspora in Toronto and throughout Canada have been subject to a level of violence and intimidation which has not been adequately documented. And we're encouraging them to come forward and assist us in our further investigation of that.
How violent are they? I mean, do they commit?
Connected to other kinds of crimes, like fraud, is one, you know, other types of crime associated with organized crime groups, other kinds in Toronto?
We have documented evidence that suggests members of the neo-black movement of Africa, the Canada zone, have been engaged in everything from street-level violence to systemic fraud, pretty much run the gamut.
Have they been under watch here for a long time, or is this fairly new?
I don't want to comment on that, thank you. I'm sorry?
You know, other kinds of crime associated with organized crime, you know, there are lots of other, you know, corruption, you know, things we associate, you know, maybe illegal gambling, that kind of thing. Do you have any, are there any links between any of those more traditional organized crime activities in this group?
We have evidence that suggests they're members of the organization involved in a wide breadth of crimes, but I can't really get into the specifics. There's ongoing investigations of other aspects of their involvement in criminal behavior and activity.
So all three of these members were part of the Black Acts, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
All three of these accused were part of the
No.
Black Act?
We're only suggesting that Akahomen Igadoisi,
This fellow in the picture here.
the man pictured there.
And so, again, the gamut of the behaviors that they would exhibit in terms of the violence, can you just go over what they kind of things that they would do to intimidate?
I don't want to speak to specific cases because many are before the courts, and when placed in the context of the existence of this organization, it becomes evident that there was a role in it. In general, beatings, use of weapons, and either the incidents were either underreported or apparently directly purposely obfuscated because of fear of the intimidation factor of who the people were victimized by and who they were perceived to be dealing with.
What's his rank in the hierarchy within the Acts?
We have information to suggest that Akahomen Igadowas functioned as the Ihaza, or bookkeeper, of the Neo-Black Movement of Africa Canada zone.
And what kind of activities do they engage in here? I mean, what's the purpose of them existing here? So what kind of activities do they engage in?
I don't want to speculate on the purpose of their existence. We have other ongoing investigations into their role in Canadian society and why they exist at all.
Sorry, one more thing. The woman, Toronto woman, how old is she? 60?
She was 63 at the time.
63. And I just want to, she was scammed out of $609,000 because she was involved with Amani.
No.
That's good.
For those questions, I'll defer back to Michael Kelly. That's his purview, that case. Are there any other questions about the Neo-Black movement? Thank you.
Sorry to clarify.
Yeah.
Part of the allegation is that she believed that she was involved with somebody, basically a fictional character that doesn't exist, is part of our allegation, that photos shown to her of a profile were of people that may or may not have had any knowledge that their face was being used in this particular scheme.
So when they met face to face, she met face to face a couple of times. How was she involved?
The allegation is that she met face to face with Mr. Igado.
But this is not the first.
Who did she believe he was then if she was involved with the fiction?
She believed he was a member of the United Nations, an official by the name of Martin Acker.
And he was acting on behalf of the person that she was having this romance with?
That is what we're alleging, yes.
Are there any further questions?
The timeline again. You mentioned August 23rd. Off the top, you said, just what, August 2013?
2014?
2014, and so the money was laundered between March and June?
Yes.
Of 2014?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's conference. A news release will come out with the photos digitally and with a rundown of everything that was spoken about today. Thank you.